In this photograph, a runaway slave named Gordon poses for his picture in a tent somewhere near Baton Rouge, and it was immediately sent north and east, and it became one of the first pictures of an actual slave with whip marks on his back. And the facts of the picture allowed people to see something that they'd only read about. Timothy Sullivan worked for Alexander Gardner. He was part of a team of photographers that arrived at Gettysburg just days after the three-day battle. And this photograph, A Harvest of Death, shows a field of the dead. And in many ways, it's the centerpiece of Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the war, as it is the centerpiece of the war itself. Abraham Lincoln sat for Matthew Brady in his gallery on Broadway in New York in 1860, and the picture, which is known generally as the Cooper Union portrait, the intensity of the stare at the camera, allowed those people who had heard unflattering descriptions of this candidate to realize that, well, maybe this man could be president. We like what he has to say. We can live with his physiognomy. In Alexander Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the war, the two photographs that are of a sharpshooter seen in two locations. Gardner doesn't tell you it's the same body, but it is. Truth and fiction in photography is common and difficult matter to explore. But these two pictures bring the matter to a head. One of the great photographs in Gardner's anthology is by a fellow named John Reiki. We know very little about Reiki. What Reiki did in this picture is really unparalleled. He's photographing a burial detail. The workers are African American. They're army soldiers now. The workers are still working in the background, but the foreground is filled with intensity of description. These handheld, intimate likenesses bear the pathos of the whole conflict. Fellow on the left is Charles Hawkins and his brother John Hawkins on the right. They're wearing different uniforms, but both are Confederates, and Charles dies soon after the picture is made. His brother survives the war. The photograph's made by a surgeon at a hospital in Washington. The Harewood Hospital was headed by a guy named Reed Brockway Bonteque. He believed that by photographing his patients, he could create a photographic record that would help us understand the brutality of war and the beautiful science of medicine. George Barnard took a position for the Union Army as an actual soldier photographer. This photograph of the ruins of the railroad depot in Charleston was made at the very end of the war in 1865. The picture is retrospective in the sense that we're kind of looking at the American past already. It was the present, but it was also the past. It was the ruins of the Confederacy. When Matthew Brady and his corps arrived at Gettysburg, there were no bodies. They had been buried. The fields looked like as if nothing had happened. And yet he found an extremely poetic way to make a picture, and it's a very reflective picture. It's about placing his own body in the landscape, contemplating where death took place. In this photograph of a woman holding in her hand two pictures, we don't know if it's her brother's or her husband, but we do know that she has cradled these pictures so lovingly, and she's taken them back to the photographer's studio to sit yet again for a picture. It brings up the question about memorial. After the Navy and Army took control of South Carolina, the plantation owners disappeared, leaving behind their slaves. The picture is in an interesting space, politically and historically, because the subjects are former slaves, but because it's before emancipation, they are just simply working the land where they have lived and worked under their plantation masters.